Take 3. All right. So it's one of those things where you get talking and then you say the wrong word and it's like, oh, I got to start over. Okay. Florida. I'm going to get through this. I swear I'm going to get through it. And then so will you. The Florida Panthers are one of the least covered teams in the NHL. I know this. I also know from view counts they're a team that garners some of the lowest amount of interest in the National Hockey League. I get it. If you've watched their games during the year, and Florida fans, don't turn this video off just yet. I'm not going to harp on it. But if you watch their games, there are a number of empty seats that are alarming at times. And early in the year, Carolina had that. Detroit's had that at points. They're paid for in Detroit. And Arizona, you have those times too. And Dallas at points in the season, it's like, come on, guys, you're finally going back to the playoffs. Go to some games. Florida, while the interest isn't there, and it's not just within Florida, but from generally from fans around the National Hockey League, the perception is, well, Florida's just they're a trash team. They're a trash team. I picked them to make the playoffs this year. They finished with 86 points. That's a drop of 10 points from where they were last year. Trash team. Shannon, trash team. There's no way they're a good team. We don't know why you picked them. And yes, this is a team I have a soft spot for. Now, they've already made a major move in bringing in Joel Quenneville. But with Joel Quenneville, that doesn't fix the problems on the roster. The problems on the roster they're going to be looking at this summer. This is why I do this series on why teams miss the playoffs. And then during the summer, after we've had the draft, after we've had free agency, I then take a look at where the roster is after. Because I think trying to project how this team is going to look in October right now, that's a fool's errand, and I'm not gonna depart on one of those. They did have 96 points last year, and that's one more point than the Colorado Avalanche had last year. And while 86 points would not have got them in the playoffs in the West this year, they had some solid runs along the way, but they were tripped up early in the season. This is again, and I've talked about this in other videos in this series, those losses early in the year, they really hurt. They really hurt your chances because now you're playing catch up. We can look at St. Louis and say, well, they were last in January. They made the playoffs. Nothing else matters. I would counter with there are plenty of teams that missed the playoffs who weren't very good in October. And Florida ranks up there. Now, last year, 17-18, okay. They were 14th in goals for. This year they were 9th. So when I kept talking about how great their offense was, I wasn't just, trying to support a team that hadn't been very good this season. And their defense and their goaltending, the goals against was 18th last season, and it was 28th this year. So that is where things fell apart. That is where things absolutely broke down for them. And it is something that a lot of us who picked Florida to get better probably should have seen coming. I think there was some belief that the second half of the season they had last year might carry over into this year, and it really didn't. But, gosh darn it, they tried. And yet the defense and the goaltending let them down. And you can make up your mind whether it's the goaltending, whether it's the defense. I think it's kind of 50-50 on that one. Now, if we're looking at contracts, and throughout this series I've been looking at contracts just to get an idea for which teams are actually in pretty good shape and which ones aren't. I'm not talking about the cap hit for next year and how much cap space Florida has, because they have a lot. This is why when Panarin and Bobrovsky are rumored to potentially be looking for a home together, Florida makes sense. Not just because, there's a lot of people in and around the area, and, it's a nice, fun place to play, even though, the attendance numbers may be low and Florida may not have made the playoffs in a while. It's still a fun place to play in Florida. The contract situation's pretty good in Florida. Huberdeau, $5.9 million till 2023. Halfway through the year, rumors, Huberdeau's probably going to get traded out. And I want to say it was Darren Dreger that was starting that. I don't know exactly where that started. But I remember hearing it and going, no. And it was, they may make room in order to bring in Panarin and Huberdeau would go. And I'm thinking, no. That's one of that he's fantastic. There's no way they're going to get rid of him. And that cap hit is beautiful. That's just a fantastic cap hit. Barkov makes $5.9 million until 2022. That is an insanely good cap hit for a guy who had 96 points this year and 8 penalty minutes. Hoffman, $5.187 million until next summer. Hoffman is highly likely to be the guy that if they decide to move a top 6 forward, it's probably the guy that ends up going. He may end up being one of those players who plays with a lot of teams. Dadonov, $4 million until next summer. He's going to get a raise next summer. He's been pretty solid. And at the time when Florida signed him for that $4 million a year, there was some risk involved. The guy plays well in the KHL. It doesn't necessarily mean it translates to the NHL level. There are plenty of cases where it does and cases where it doesn't. So you do take that risk. It was a risk that was taken by Dale Talon. Turned out to be a pretty solid risk. Dadonov, Barkov, Huberdeau, pretty amazing top line. And the Florida Panthers have one of the better scoring teams in the league. So the idea of adding Panarin and maybe moving out a forward to bring in somebody on the blue line, good move. Now, jury's out kind of contracts for me. Ekblad's $7.5 million till 2025. I understand why he got signed for that amount of money. I understand the term. I just don't know that his play thus far has justified that money. Matheson, $4.875 million till 2026. I've talked about this contract before. When they signed this contract, I thought that was crazy money. And I like Matheson. I don't think he is as dirty a player as Canuck fans are going to. And I don't think he is as bad defensively as others have argued. But I also don't know that I would give $5 million to Mike Matheson. I think that you could get a lot of what he does for about half that price in a defenseman. That being said, they have that contract till 2026. Trocheck at $4.75 million till 2022 had a bit of a setback year this year. I expect to bounce back next year. So based on that bounce back, he won't be in the jury's out type area next year. UFAs this summer. McGinn, $3.33 million. He's unrestricted this summer. That comes off. Sheahan, $2.1 million. They only acquired him with the idea they were going to let him go via free agency. They brought him in from Pittsburgh. I think they probably saw that there wasn't a whole lot of interest in him around the rest of the NHL for trade deadline purposes, and they thought, we'll give him a look. So they may keep him, but I don't know if they keep him at that cap hit or if they get it to drop. Brouwer at $850K. I wouldn't be surprised if they bring Brouwer back for about that same amount of money. His season, not great, but not horrible either. Restricted free agents, nobody due for a big raise. Dennis Mulligan was the one that I saw, and I thought, well, I could put Mulligan on the board, and then I thought about it, and I went, he's not going to get a raise, not a big one. So they don't really have any issues. They absolutely can go out and sign a couple of big number guys and make it work with their roster, which is kind of scary because you can focus on the fact they have 86 points. I focus on the fact they already had the 9th best offense in the league, and if they're going to add to it, that's going to make them even better. And I don't hear very much about Erik Karlsson being tied to Florida. What about Erik Karlsson to Florida? And they have the cap space. So Karlsson is going to be tied to a lot of teams if he doesn't end up staying in San Jose. Luongo and Reimer, they have a combined cap hit of $7.9 million. Didn't live up to the $7.9 million combined. No offense involving Luongo. Luongo at this point, he's older. He gets injured on a semi-regular basis, which is probably part of the reason why he's taking some time in the offseason to think things over, sit down, talk to the Florida Panthers about what they want to do, because Sam Montembeault changed the conversation when he came up, and he got a chance, and he played pretty well. And there are a number of young goaltenders that come up and change the conversation this year. I think of Mackenzie Blackwood in New Jersey as another example. You get these kids come up, and as a general manager, if you have a James Reimer making $3.4 million, right? And then you bring up a kid who's making $800K, and he does just as well as Reimer, on some level you have to go, gee, I could save $2.5 million next year by getting Reimer out and putting this kid in and not notice a big difference. And I can take that $2.5 million and I can make an even better offer to a guy like Panarin or to a guy like Bobrovsky. Now, if they bring in Bobrovsky, that makes things even more complicated. Montembeault, who's a restricted free agent this summer, don't expect a big raise for him. He didn't play that much. And his numbers aren't like fantastically superior or anything, so I don't expect a huge raise for him. I expect probably Colin Delia kind of money. If Montembeault is still there, if he's in the mix, and they bring in Bobrovsky, and I'm just saying that because even though there's Columbus fans are going, we're not losing him now, then there will be fans who feel that way. And you know what? They might be right. Winning has a tremendous way of changing a player's mind about whether or not he wants to leave a city. But let's just say they bring in a goalie. So let's just say that Dale Talon looks this summer. He and Joel Quenneville sit down, and Quenneville goes, yeah, this goaltending isn't good enough. So you've got Luongo and Reimer to combine $7.9 million. If Luongo retires, there's a cap penalty that goes to Vancouver and Florida. You've got Montembeault, who looks ready for regular duty in the NHL. And I believe he'd have to clear waivers to go back down next year as well. So you've got some decisions to make here because you can't carry 4 goalies. You're not Philly. So there's going to be some interesting decisions to be made here. Does James Reimer have value on the trade market? He wouldn't have during the season. He might during the summer. There might be a team that says, yeah, we'll take Reimer. You have to eat half that cap hit, though. So for Florida, they may end up having to eat some money to trade somebody, which would be an odd turn for them to have, that kind of situation. Florida, to me, it feels like they're a team that's ready to spend a ton of money and to compete now. And we'll see whether or not the fans respond accordingly and fill that arena. I do think there is a market there. I do think it can work. I think we saw with Arizona at the end of the year. I think we saw with Carolina at the end of the year and now into the playoffs that these markets that everybody complains about, they can work. It's just when you haven't given them anything to cheer about for about, in Florida's case, they haven't won around since 96. It's hard to generate a ton of interest and excitement. But you bring in a couple of big names to this team that already has some pretty decent talent, I think the people will show up. October 6th to 16th, as we get into how and why this team misses the playoffs. They lost 8 of their first 10. They lost the first 4 games. They lost 6 out of 7. They lost 8 out of 10. This team slowly backed its way out. There's no gigantic losing streak. No 12 out of 13 on this. They lose 7 in a row from January 3rd to January 15th. February 26th to March 7th, they lost 6 in a row. So there are just these moments where they slip, and eventually they're out. Even though all of that happened, I didn't personally blame Bob Boughner for it, and I honestly don't think that with the way this has worked out, I don't necessarily think Dale Talon did either. I think he just went, I want Quenneville, and that's what it was. Now, if we're looking at prospects, it gets kind of interesting because Denisenko is listed as our highest rated prospect in the Hockey News' Future Watch. He's likely to arrive next summer. Owen Tippett, Heponiemi as well. They are all forwards. Now, Tippett may very well play this coming season. Heponiemi is probably a year away. He might play in the fall. They're all forwards. Florida is full of all of this really strong talent up front. They do need more help on the blue line and in net. This is why I find the whole Panarin thing kind of interesting. Because they don't need help with scoring goals, so they must be willing then to move somebody out to get help on the blue line. If they get that help on the blue line, they can be a playoff team, and I'm still saying, yeah, they're my pick to probably make the 2020 playoffs, because maybe that'll be one of my annual things too. Shannon picked Florida to make the playoffs again. They missed the playoffs again. So we'll see. But when you look at where they lost the playoffs, this is another example of how those games you lose in October, very important. Because it leaves you trying to dig your way out of a hole right away. And then for them, they dug themselves into it again in January. And then at the end of February, when there was still that flicker of hope, yeah, they put it out themselves. So it wasn't the romantic ending to the season they had last year where they got so close and they just missed. It was more of a, yeah, no, you're not good enough. So we'll see what they do next year. But there's all the pieces here for this team to be a success. It's a matter of putting the pieces in place and making sure you've got the blue line and the goaltending completely in line to make things happen. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. And hey, thank you guys so much for watching. I'll talk to you again soon.